Ladies and gentlemen, the career politician, Leo Delperdang from the 94th District.
I was asked to come in and just give a few words about the current Evergy rate case going on. So some of you guys have already listened to me when I talked at Americans for Prosperity. I also did a talk at the Republican Women United this last weekend, so it might be kind of a repeat for you. If so, if something's on your mind, feel free to jump up and ask questions on it too. The case really focuses on, and we'll just leave that there for a little bit and I'll get into some PowerPoints in a little bit, but the case focuses on Evergy's request to build 2 natural gas powered electric generation plants in Kansas and acquire a solar facility to be constructed up around Lawrence area. Kansas Central, or Evergy Central, would acquire 50% ownership of 2 natural gas plants. One's looking at in Hutchinson, the other one in Wellington, for a total, each plant is 710 megawatts, and they'd own 50% of each of that. But the remaining 50% is going to be owned by an Evergy affiliate, which is Missouri West. So they're going to be pumping a little bit of it out of our state here. The gas plants are planning to be operational sometime around 2028 and 29. Solar facilities supposed to be operational sometime around 2028. Here's where it gets a little more interesting. Now, the gas plants, they're looking at retail rate increases of about 8.6%. And the solar plant would add about 0.7. So solar is a little bit minor there, but that's kind of on average. So don't remember that 8.6 hardcore. That's just kind of average, and I'll get into more of that as we go through it. The solar plant construction is currently subject to ongoing litigation. So it may happen, it may not. So that will play out. Evergy will begin charging the ratepayers about 1 year after the gas plant construction begins. Before it actually provides the electricity, but it's an accounting way that they can help defer some of the costs as they're building this thing. It's looking to fall on the backs of 735,000 retail ratepayers in Kansas. So quite a few of us out there. Evergy has designated the cost of the gas plants as confidential at this point. So there's some information I've got. There's some non-disclosure info I've got from some of the sides. So I'm kind of watching notes to make sure I don't get into something that I really should not do here at this point. We know it's confidential as far as the overall cost. I did have meetings with Mr. Campbell, the CEO of Evergy, last year in my office. Prices were coming in somewhere around 1.6 billion. So that's kind of a public number at that point. But let's see. The part I've got a little concern with is that price, or the overall real pricing, should really be just up front with all of us. It's a public company, it's a monopoly, we're the ratepayers. It'd be nice to know exactly what these things are going to cost. And I think more of that's going to come out as the rate case proceeds. It is the position of the KCC, Kansas Corporation Commission, that the gas plants should be constructed as soon as possible. And it should be noted the cost of the gas plants could very much increase. I've heard they've already almost doubled since when they started this project, just be from other factors and the supplies of it and inflation, et cetera. So I think that's part of what they're looking at. Let's get these things moving, get them on the road. Kansas Central, Evergy issued in the case is the planning assumption of Evergy that it will retire the Lawrence coal plants. They're looking at retiring the Lawrence one in 2028 and 2 of the 3 Jeffrey Center coal plants in 2030. Now, were any of you at the Hughes Metroplex where Evergy came in and they kind of went through, and I know Carl was there. To me, it was quite interesting. There were more speakers either from online or in person, like specifically from Lawrence area, who were jumping Evergy saying, these things should all be retired. Why haven't you already done it? But yet, looking at the books on it, they've got another 15 to 23 years of life on the books. So if we go retiring these things early, it's going to have to be write-downs, et cetera. Plus, the question is, do we get into maybe a less reliable source while that? But there was a lot of people that went up and talked that they wanted that retired now. So my concern was that it needs to be run out for the next 10 plus years before we retire those. There was a attorney outfit, Brubaker, and they presented some pretty compelling testimony replacing the coal generation with natural gas decreases the reliability, and increases price and volatility. So that was kind of interesting to hear. Another important point is that the increased retail costs do not end with the two gas plants that they're talking about right now. Evergy they add an additional 710 megawatt plants, possibly plant 3 in 2031 and a 4th plant in 2034. So again, we may be looking at additional rate adjustments as that happens there. Taking just rounded off, we were talking 1.6, 1.7 billion. Easy math, let's say $2 billion for each of these. If they do plants 1, 2, and then 3 coming up in 31, that's about $6 billion in additional expenditures, and they're going to expect a return on that, okay? Evergy Central, the retail ratepayers are really in a possible position where we may end up paying for essentially 2 electric generating systems. If the coal does not retire, we're going to be paying for the coal, and as the gas comes on, we're going to be paying for the gas too. So a lot of kind of moving parts on this thing as it goes through. In addition, if they actually build if they do build 3 or even 4 gas plants coming up here, each plant is estimated to use about 120,000 million BTU to run per day. You get 4 of them going, that's 480,000 million BTU. I mean, it's a big number, okay? Here's where it gets interesting is you guys might know who Kansas Gas is or Black Hills Energy, or et cetera. The ones that actually are providing the gas is Southern Star Pipeline. They're providing the actual gas itself. Southern Star Pipeline is currently capable of doing 2.4 billion cubic foot. And therefore, if these plants all come online, we could be looking at needing a material expansion just for the gas supplier in order to supply them all. So again, what's that do to gas rates? That's going to be back on everybody's shoulders here. Okay. We have had some cascading retail rate increases from Evergy. I think in 2023, 2024, we had some increases there. There was transmission delivery charges of about 2.5% or 2.42% on May 1st of this year. And I've got a KC docket to back that up. There was a general rate increase pending, requested a system average retail rate of about 9%. And then the gas plants, between the gas plants and the solar, is another 9.3%. That totals up to 28.42%. So the numbers are getting serious there. In the future, transmission delivery charges, as I said, we just seen one increase on that May 1st. Well, they're going to hit us each year on that. So May 1st of 2026, probably see another one. Gas plant 3, 8.6%. Gas plant 4, 8.6%. And again, it's another 17% area that it could be increasing. Okay. Large load tariffs. Evergy, and for obvious reasons, they're seeking larger and larger customers to come into Kansas. And really, the larger customers could benefit all of us. It really could. I'd love to have the jobs here. I want to see the growth in the economy. But same token, I want to make sure the retail ratepayers, you and I in this room, do not end up flipping the bill for that. You know, if they want to bring out their larger customers and the needs, I understand that, I fully do, but keep us little guys out of the picture on it. So Okay, with that, trying to see where we hit this. How do you move this forward here? Like that? Okay. June 6th, KCC staff and the interveners in the rate case filed a testimony, and there should be a docket number up there for anybody. And I think we're filming this, and I can get a copy of this if you need it online here. The testimony of the commercial interveners was filed and prepared by a Michael Gorman and a Brian Andrews of Brubaker and Associates. The testimony of Mike and Brian was thorough, and it was highly professional, and my thanks to them for their excellent testimony. In addition to Evergy, there were three parties. Let's go down here. Yeah, okay, there were three parties that filed the full cost of service examinations and are kind of the major participants in the case. And that'd be the staff of the Kansas Corporation Commission, CURB, or Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, and there are commercial interveners, okay? So on the commercial interveners, we had testimonies from Kroger, Holly Frontier, which is the big refinery out in El Dorado, USD 259, Walmart, Enbridge Pipelines, and Kansas Gas Service in Black Hills, okay? Here's what they're asking for. Evergy is asking for a rate increase of just under $200 million, $197 million. And there are, if you can read it, there are links there to back that up. Now, we have an increase amount that was from the commercial interveners. They're saying you don't need quite that much. You should be able to get along with $134 million. But if you look in the red, there's a little caveat that's coming up here, and I'll talk about that in just a few slides. So put that in the back of your mind, 50 to 67 million for nuclear production, and we do have Wolf Creek sitting here. CURB responded saying, yeah, we ought to be able to get through with about $132 million increase. And KCC is saying, no, we think 113 million should do it. So we're knocking them down. They're not going to get the full amount that they're asking for. That's the important note here. Okay. Here's where it gets a little more interesting is on the, let's see, Evergy's federal, let's see, as of December 31st, Evergy has received a $65.1 million nuclear energy PTC, or production tax credit. Beginning in 24, nuclear credits include Wolf Creek and are eligible for these credits through 2032. So the credit is computed at $15 per megawatt and is subject to be phased out at certain intervals there. But the credit may be used to offset Evergy's South income tax liability or transferred to an unrelated party. Evergy has estimated the credit based on the existing internal revenue regulations and services there. So the IRS is expected to provide guidance regarding the type of revenue to be included in the computation and gross receipts through 2025. So what it's saying is there is a possibility we'll see $113 million increase, but could we see maybe $67 million coming off of that too? So it's going to be an interesting as it plays out, okay? And I think there's the nuclear credit. Okay, that was what I just talked about there. Okay, propose. Here's another interesting part of it, the return on equities. Evergy Central proposed long-term debt, as you can see, about 48%, common equity, 52%, and the return on that equity at 10.5%. So that's an ongoing amount that determines how much they should be making. The commercial interveners were a little bit different. They had a little bit less common equity and 9.4% on the return on equity. The KCC staff had, again, a different one. Again, common equity would be about 48.7%, along with a 9.7%. So what it's doing is it's knocking the rate case down as we go through it. Okay, so what does this really mean? Here's where we get into the residential services. There's 630,000 of us, you and me and the residents throughout the territory here, that are looking at almost 15% increase on average. And it's about $12.50 to $13 per month. But now you get into small businesses. There's 89,000 small businesses, and the increase to them is about $35 per month. Medium businesses, there's fewer of them, 1,383, but look at the number where it's jumping. And where is that, who's gonna pay for that? It's gonna come from us, absolutely, $1,106. Okay, we ready for some bigger ones? Large customers, 12% increase, just under 9,000 per month increase. Now, are we all sitting down for the next one? This is the really big customers. There's a couple of real big ones, 13%, $135,000 per month utility increase. And again, that will ultimately be paid for by us, not the businesses. That's just the way it works out there, okay? There's also schools, 1,537 school districts at about a 15% increase, and a little over $300 per month. And then don't forget lighting services. And when I first seen that, I was like, lighting services? It's street lights, traffic lights, security issues. 40,000 of them for about a 12% increase. That's $6.70. And again, if that is street lights, traffic lights, again, that comes directly out of us. That relates back to property taxes and who knows what. So that's just where it's heading. Okay, that's kind of the extent that I wanted to get into the rate case. I'm willing to open this thing for any questions you want to do either about this or if you want to jump into anything else. Let's do it.
Okay, so some questions. If you're a member, raise your hand up high. If you got 3 of them, we'll start right here. Do you know if there's any movement towards streamlining the regulations so that these small modular nuclear reactors have a better chance of being built and because they're cheaper and more efficient to run than either the coal or the gas plant?
I like the way you think. I've been preaching for SMRs for a long time here. I have had multiple meetings with David Campbell, who is the Evergy CEO, and Evergy is extremely interested in it. They truly are. But David told me, and I have to agree with him 100%, he says, we're not going to be number one because we don't know what's the true cost, what's the overruns, what's EPA going to get into. But he says, might be willing to be number 5 or 6. And they're starting to come about. I wish I could have done this talk in a week or 2 weeks out. I am flying out tomorrow morning for Denmark. And the consulate over there is going to have me touring through various nuclear reactor sites. Europe and some of the other countries are way ahead of us on that. And I'm so anxious to go see that. Maybe that'd be a follow-up that we could do. But yes, I'm absolutely for it. I've asked several times from a state perspective, what can I do as chairman of Energy to help ease some of the requirements? How can we make the state of Kansas more friendly to this? And I'm all ears if anybody wants to get into it. So good question, thank you.
Okay, another question.
Yeah, since rate increases were approved for when they built the coal plants, who's ordering those coal plants to be shut down? Because we're paying rates based on the fact they're operating.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that we would have a right to have them keep operating until they've ended the rate increases that were approved.
And we do. It's got to be approved through the Kansas Corporation Commission, and that is why they were having these hearings across the state. I wish more of them would have showed up. There was not that many people at the hearing the other night. But what was intriguing was the number of people who called in mainly from the Lawrence area. We've got to shut these down, and Evergy, you committed you'd have these shut down by now. We want it done. And it's like, we can shut them down, but it's going to cost y'all more because you still want to be able to flick that switch and have a light come on. Where's that power going to come from? But yes, the bottom line is it does have to be approved through Kansas Corporation Commission and essentially us before it can happen. Is that what you're looking for?
What I'm saying is, I'm already paying to have those plants operate for another 25 years. It's a breach of trust, if not a breach of contract, that you shut them down early.
I cannot argue that. I can't argue that.
It seems to me we have ever stopped them from doing that, and
Yeah.
not worry about a person.
Well, and I'll do my part to keep putting the pressure on them to keep them open. I don't see the reason to shut them down right now. That's my opinion, unless somebody could really educate me more.
So ratepayers are going to pay, Kansas ratepayers are going to pay for this. Half the energy is going out of state. So we're paying, we're actually subsidizing energy that's going out of state. Is that correct?
In this rate case, we're paying for approximately half of the gas plants because that's the energy that will stay in Kansas Central. Part of it is, you can say is going to go out of state, but it's still part of Evergy. They own the grid area that works on the eastern part of Missouri. That's where they're wanting to send it.
This is my normal free market question, but what is wrong with letting each energy source pay for their own without being subsidized in some sort by the government? I noticed Senator Moran has been advertising for tax credits for a clean energy source. Do we need to be involved in that kind of stuff?
Did you say tax cuts for like seniors? Is that credits for seniors?
Tax credits for the energy company.
Oh, okay. But that's a whole nother subject there. It really is. It really is. Yeah.
Okay, here's my simple question. Evergy reported almost $900 billion in revenues last year. Now they want $200 million rate increase. I'll give you the Democrat question. How is that fair?
That might be a question more for Evergy itself. But yeah, actually in the hearings that were up at Metroplex here, a lot of that came in as far as what are the current wages of the executives, and are they really hurting? How much more money do they need? And that is a good question, and that is part of the considerations the Kansas Corporation Commission is looking at. How much do they really need out of this? Do they really need the full amount, or do they need a smaller portion thereof? So, but it's really about building the additional generation.
My question is not about energy, it's about Medicaid. Can you do something more to expand Medicaid?
Okay, what would you like me to do to expand Medicaid?
You know, there are many people, they can't afford to have private insurance. They cannot have Blue Cross and Blue Shield,
Okay.
but they need some kind of health insurance coverage.
Yeah. So,
I'm just wondering if you can expand Medicaid.
okay. Well, I could take a poll in the room here. Would the people here, would you like me to expand Medicaid? In exchange, I will need to increase your tax base. And are you willing to pay for the Medicaid expansion, not for the needy? The needy are already covered, the children are already covered, the moms that are end up pregnant are covered. It is for ages 19 through 64 who are able-bodied, willing to work, but I don't want to, so I want you guys to pay for it. What do you want me to do? I'm your elected official. That's where I'll leave it right there.
Well, I gotta pause it before I ask the question. A number of other states have had data centers come in, and my understanding is they're huge energy users, and I saw a report recently, and I don't know how accurate it is, that these states that have gotten these data centers have massive increases in their electric utility rates because
I guess they're just like an energy sink in a sense. And I was curious if you had any insight in terms of if they bring in a big user, and you outlined some potentially there, if this would be part of the effort to generate higher utility rates to basically service those data centers.
Yeah, so that actually came up this year in the legislature. Specifically, the Senate Bill 51 was for data centers. Senate Bill 51 had some really serious issues, and I was one of the main ones that killed the thing. We killed it on the floor. They were trying to bring it out, but it had issues as far as wanting all these tax credits. Upwards of 60 years, they wanted free tax credits and all that back, and tax abatements, specific on power. They wanted to come in with their own type power sources, which then got into RESA possible violations, which are statutory out there too. There were issues on cooling, the noise, the fact that they would come in and possibly suck a bunch of power resources and others up, and they might only employ 6 people at the data center. They might be run out of a different state. That bill got killed, but then it resurfaced again in Senate Bill 98. So my hat is off to the leadership up there, because when it resurfaced, they came to me, the leadership of the House came to me, as well did some with the Senate, and said, you seem to be the one that knows most about this. What do we need to do to fix this? And I had 10 amendments that we put onto it, specifically on the tax, doing away with some of the tax issues, doing away with the amount of water that could be used and how to conserve it, how they would generate electricity, all that. And those 10 got on there. They did run the bill through, and it passed with well over 100 votes in the House. But it took a lot of the wants away from the data centers. In other words, they're going to come out, if they want to come out here, it's because what's the price of energy or employees in Kansas versus California? We don't need to give the farm away to get them. And especially, it'd be different if it was like I'm going to say a Panasonic, they're employing 4,000 people. That's a little different story. But you're going to put up a big data center, and you might employ half a dozen or a dozen people there. I'm not going to make you guys pay for all that here. So that's basically it. Yeah.
Really, thanks for the discussion. Not all rate increases are equal. I've seen in the past where Kansas City gets a 5% increase and we get a 15%. What's the breakdown on this one? And where do most of the ACC and the Evergy leadership live, here or there?
That's a good question as far as where they live specifically, because I'm not 100% sure of the eastern borders between, what he's talking about is Evergy, Kansas City Metro, and then there's an Evergy, Kansas Central, which we're obviously the Central. As far as the members of the executives in Evergy and stuff, I'm not sure where they live. Probably Metro, but I cannot sit there and say that authoritatively. This case here is mainly focused on, KCC docket number 25-EKCE. What is that saying? Evergy, Kansas Central. That's what the dockets are focused on. So it's looking at us. Correct. Correct. Is that what you're looking for there? But yeah, every one of these dockets that I've got, when you go through it, they're all labeled EKC, Evergy, Kansas Central. The plants are being built here. So they're being built in Hutch and they're being built in Winfield. So it truly is mostly here. But keep in mind, when I talked about it, they're wanting us to pay for 50% of that. The other 50% is being paid for by the affiliates up there around Kansas City area. So they are breaking it down a little bit. But this specific document is on Kansas Central. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being here. Glad to have you all as always. Just wanted to point out that my house was built in 1954 and it's energy independent presently as of 2019, which coincidentally happens to be the first year a small nuclear reactor was put in service on the USS Nautilus, 1954. The question that I have is, what tools does the state legislature have to control this rampant rising cost that we are facing?
That's the million-dollar question, really. You know, what tools we do have is to keep the pressure on the KCC. The Kansas Corporation Commission is the final authority. Yes, you can have the full amount, you can have partial, or no, you can't have any. But I've got a real good rapport going with them, and it is open communication all the way. They know where I stand. When they had the hearing up here at the Hughes Metroplex, I walked in, and most everyone from the KCC, they came over and greeted me. It's just a good rapport. And they'll tell me a lot of information that I just am not going to repeat up here, but that's really how you get it done. Let them know we're watching, and you're here for the people, and you've got to keep it in our best interest. You're absolutely correct. The small modulars, they've been around a long time. Think of any big naval boat, if you will. They're run on that, the submarines, et cetera. It's not a new technology. But right now, it's a battle with the EPA from a federal level. And then it comes back to what can I do from a state level to help make Kansas friendly to make that happen? And we're here for them. And the powers that be that would, the David Campbells that would be flipping the bill, they know. There was a company out of, I believe it was Memphis, Tennessee, that wanted to come up. They had lobbyists coming after us to try and get us to do a kind of a qualification or overall survey on how would small modular nuclears work in Kansas. But they wanted the state to pay almost $500,000 to do this survey and so forth. The inside of that, I picked up the phone and I called Evergy executives and said, hey, would this be beneficial to you guys? Their response, we already had it done. If you sign the non-disclosure here, you can have the information. It's like, why would I pay for that? Why would I make you guys pay for it at that point in time? So we just got to keep communications open. They know we're watching. So.
Okay, question here, Mr. Brown.
Leo, thank you. You have given us a tremendous body of knowledge and appreciate the effort it took to create that. My question goes in a different direction because I'd like to know more about your transportation functions. A couple of things. Last week, the state of Texas announced that it was not going to renew funding for their part of the Heartland Flyer Amtrak train. And as a result, Oklahoma will be either having to pay for it all, but Amtrak says unless Texas renews, they're not going to run the train. So question number one is, what do you see in the way of the Heartland Flyer really happening? And do you see it as a viable option? And secondly, Kansas for a long time has needed some work done to give us a second cross-state interstate. A lot of people are hoping it'll be US 54-400. Where does that project stand right now, and what can you tell us about maybe making roads better?
Okay. On the first part with the Heartland Flyer, I would ask you, turn to your left, and you got a guy, Dennis Rogers, out here, who's Mr. Train himself, and we give him a hard time through the years. So, I've given up. It's been looked at, it's been cussed and discussed, and it's the dollar amount. There's a section of track south of Wichita that I've heard all kinds of numbers from 40 million to 100 million to 600 million to get this up to speed in order to have commercial traffic across it. Who's going to write the check for it? That's what it comes down to, and in which time, we're stuck without it. You had the other part of the question there on expansion possibly of highways. Okay, I was out, maybe it was a month ago now, I had a meeting with the KDOT, and we met out in the Pratt offices, even though it was Topeka people that came down. They are looking currently at expanding US 400 to a 4-lane across the state. There's a tremendous amount of truck traffic going on out there. They're looking at other roads too, but I learned a new term out there that they've got sensors all along 400, and they're watching not just how much traffic's out there, but they're watching platooning. And I have not heard platooning in a conversation with highway traffic. We've all been there. You get on a 2-lane road and you have a semi-truck ahead of you and you got 20 cars following. Nobody can pass them. So that tight spacing is known as platooning in their world. So they're watching how much of this is happening out there to where do we expand this first. But the overall goal is to get that thing to a 4-lane all the way across the southern part of the state. So you'd have 70 on the north side and 400 on the south side. Also hit them on a few others. If you take 61, I think it is, north out of Pratt up toward Hutchison, there's so much truck traffic on that too. It is just, they resurfaced it maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, and just immediately it was rutted down there. You get rains on the road and it's hydroplaning. It just can't handle the truck traffic. So again, do they need a thicker surface? Do they need 4-lane? But they're taking that in consideration also. So.
Yeah, I'm concerned about what is Evergy doing about protecting the grid from EMP or dirty bombs taking down the grid? Is there anything, are they doing anything about that?
There's ongoing discussions on that one. What he's talking about, EMP, electromagnetic pulses, and the average age of our grid up here is pushing 50 years old. I've heard some say it's 50, some say 57. Bottom line is it is not hardened. You could set off an EMP 200 miles up in the atmosphere, and it wouldn't necessarily hurt us, but it would take down widespread chunks of the grid. Carl, you had a good comments out there at that forum about what it could do population-wise if we lost a bunch of the grid and the amount of chaos and the deaths and all that stuff. But it's something I speak with regularly on with Evergy on, but I also meet with the Southwest Power Pool, because that's really where that needs to happen, because Southwest Power Pool kind of runs the big grid across, was 14 states, now they're saying they were 15 and now they're saying 16, so they're still expanding. But that's really your big grid operator where it needs to go, and conversations are happening. Again, I don't have a clue what that would cost to upgrade this grid from that perspective and get it hardened. I mean, we're talking billions and billions, so it's coming, but it's going to be a slow process.
You mentioned Southern
Gas,
Gas.
or Southern Star, I'm sorry.
Is that Kansas-based, or where will that natural gas be provided for running these two locations?
Okay.
Will it come at least domestically from Kansas, and so those of us that have gas wells and production would benefit from it?
So Southern Star is the actual supplier of the gas that's ready to be burned. So if you're part of Cuyahoga and stuff, I would imagine it goes there. I'm not overly familiar with the whole refining process before they actually get it. There's Southern Star and there's a couple of other players. One Oak is one of them. I think One Oak's based in Tulsa. Southern Star, I'm not sure where they're headquartered, whether it's here or Colorado. I think it might be Colorado, but please don't hold me up to that one.
Would it be beneficial to those of us in Kansas, or again, just like we're selling it to Missouri, and that other, was it a coal-fired plant that we sell everything to Colorado? So we paid to build that that plant, and we sell it to Colorado.
So I know out by Hutch, where they're building that plant, they're real close to a natural gas plant out there. And I think the plans are to get the natural gas feed for the electric generation right there. So again, you'd have tax money, you'd have that funding there, but then who actually owns that gas plant? Where's the money go from there? That's another question. So, yeah.
At the AFP thing, you mentioned your trip to Montana and Wyoming. Can you go into that a little bit and tell us what you saw out there?
Oh, yeah, that was that 2 years ago, I want to say. Took a trip to, it was actually Gillette, Wyoming, and got to tour what they called the largest, I don't think it was in the country, but the largest coal mining operation there. And it was a huge operation, and they're loading coal and getting them onto the trains and so forth. And I just asked, I said, a lot of this going back to Evergy or what? Well, no, their biggest shipments were going to Utah and New Mexico. And I said, okay, those two states are really major users of coal. Well, them two states, it appears, have contracts in hand, so they burn the coal, they generate the electricity that goes to California. And you got California that says, we're green, you know. Well, you're burning coal to get it, though, you know, but people don't want to think about that. Then we took the next day and went through what they called an experimental coal-fired power plant. And the power plant itself had, and that was kind of new to me there, but it had a catalyst type of a setup on the exhaust stack. And I believe they were pumping anhydrous type of ammonia into it as a catalyst. And it was reacting with the particulates leaving from the coal fire. And it was taking out 98, 99% of the pollution, if you would. So you could almost throw the coal plant in as really a green energy, if you would. The pollution just wasn't there with the catalyst going on. Is that what you were after there? Yeah. So.
We'll let you try that with the Lawrence crowd. You tell them that.
Yeah.
You got a question for Jerry?
Yeah, I had a question about something on energy. I'm frankly not smart enough to understand energy questions and issues. But so I do understand nothing. We've had the sexual violence prevention program for about 30 years now in this state, where the idea was that even though people had served their entire prison sentence for whatever crime they had committed, that wasn't good enough for the legislators. They said, we need to keep these people in prison because they might still commit crimes. So we came up with this sexual violence prevention program 30 years ago, where the idea was we wouldn't imprison them because it served their whole sentence. We would treat them. Yeah, that's the ticket. We would treat them. And we've had this program for 30 years, and it's supposed to have treatment, and you're supposed to measure change. And the psychology is clear that these people aren't criminally insane. They put a label on them like narcissistic personality or antisocial personality stuff, and they keep them locked up. It isn't called being locked up, it's called treatment. For 30 years, you've had more people come out of that program at large in pine boxes, or whatever they use for coffins these days, that have been approved for release, because this is the program, nobody gets in trouble for keeping people locked up. It's a program where you only get in trouble if you let someone get out and something bad happens. So my question is, I know there's not a big lobby for the sexual violence predators and their freedoms and being fair to them. Maybe that's why I'm interested in that kind of subject. But is it time to review this program? 30 years of failure, 30 years of expense, 30 years of being based, frankly, on false information just to keep people locked up. Isn't it time for a review of that program and see what it really does? I know people like the idea of keeping people locked up for a long time so they can't ever commit a crime. But we know if we put someone in jail for a crime they didn't commit, that's wrong. These people are in jail for crimes that no one says they committed. They just said, oh, they did a test, and the test shows that statistically they're 8.6% likely to commit a crime, or something like that. That's in my question.
Okay. Yeah. That would be more of one for the corrections. We have a corrections committee up there. If it was a year ago, I'd say Steve Owens, because he was the chair of that. Steve's since moved on to the Senate. I'm trying to think of who runs that. Might be Bob Lewis out of Garden City, who's an attorney, I think. But that's a question I could bring up to him. That's where it would have to start before it comes out to us. But yeah, there's always reform going on. I do sit on the budget committee for corrections. So we've got a little input there. One of the things not to turn off your subject there, but I took a one-on-one tour not too long ago of the Hutch Correctional Facility, because the Secretary, Zamuda, is wanting to build a new correctional facility out in Hutch to replace all this. And I'm thinking, is that really worth the $500 million that they're wanting to spend on it? So took a tour through that. The building itself and everything is in really good shape, but it's a question of how are the inmates being treated? What are the living conditions like in there? And I'm going to push forward to get a lot of upgrades out to that building, whether it be plumbing or electrical or how their kitchen is laid out. And there's a lot that we can do from that perspective. But as far as your question, I can follow up with Bob on that one and just see what needs to be looked at there. I mean, there was one case that hit not too long ago here, Conroy O'Brien. Does that name ring any bells? Conroy O'Brien in 1978 was a state trooper who was executed on the roadside by a couple of individuals, and they were sentenced to life, if you will. But then it was earlier this year that the parole board decided, you've paid your debt, it's time to let you out. How do you explain that to the family of the state trooper who was essentially executed on the side of the road? They put 2 bullets in his head while he's on his knees. How else do you explain that? Should I be lenient on them people and let them out? Not going to happen on my case. So.
Quick energy case. We elect a Republican governor next year. Would it be possible to resurrect the coal-fired power plant that they had out in Garden City that Sebelius managed to put the axe on? Now that the EPA has changed hands and hopefully the governor's case, or even someplace else besides anywhere in Kansas, because that seemed like a viable option at the time, but it didn't meet Sebelius's criteria.
I don't know. I don't know if I see any new coal-fired plants going out. I just don't. Even no matter who's governor there, that's just my opinion looking at it. I could see the additional of the gas-powered. There was a long time here for years that we jumped all over Evergy because, by golly, your rates are higher than Oklahoma and Texas. Well, Oklahoma and Texas was burning natural gas at the time, and we were burning coal. Well, what's wrong with you people? Now that they're having the opportunity to jump over to natural gas and maybe do something about the coal prices, we're jumping back on them again. So I just don't know if I see additional coal plants going in. I just don't see it. So.
Okay, one last question from Walter.
I was told that coal is the cheapest price.
Yep.
Energy. Coal is the cheapest price of energy.
Okay.
Well, you just said gas is cheaper.
Technically, wind is cheaper.
Well, no,
because of the fuel.
It's the same as a sailboat going across the Atlantic with a motorboat following.
Okay.
And when the wind stops, the motorboat pulls it.
Right.
So Wolf Creek can exist without the windmills. The windmills cannot exist without Wolf Creek.
Mm-hmm.
It's a redundancy.
Yeah. But no, that's good input. And honestly, before I would see coal going in, I could see these small modular reactors replacing it. They can be scaled accordingly to whatever size plant you're going to replace. And that's really what I see happening. There's experimenting now with even putting these things underground. So you don't think of Wolf Creek, of what you got out there, but rather what's the cooling? It's sodium-based cooling. If they build them underground, can they just have the natural geothermal type cooling on these things? And you don't even have to look at it. But that's what I see actually happen out there. But yeah, we could go back and forth on the coal or gas or which is cheaper. I know how we were just beating up on Evergy on it though for a number of years. So thank you.
Okay, Neil,